Thank you for joining me for another week of Honey from the Word. Today's lesson or devotion is Hagar, Hope for the Hopeless. I'll be reading from Genesis chapter 16, verses 7 through 16. Now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, where have you come from? And where are you going? She said, I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress, Sarai. The angel of the Lord said to her, Return to your mistress and submit yourself to her under her hand. And the angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, Behold, you are with child. You shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. He shall be a wild man. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, You are the God who sees. For she said, have I also here seen him who sees me? Therefore, the well was called Bir Lahai Roi. Observe, it is between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abraham was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. Many times have you and I thought God only cares for the most important people in life. Maybe you thought that God is so concerned about leaders, and especially world leaders, more than he cares about ordinary moms, dads, business people, teachers, secretaries, and factory workers. We sometimes assume that God has more time for important people and important events and needs that are going on around the world, that he's just too busy to be concerned with us. Sometimes we get the feeling that God has overlooked us. Sometimes we are overwhelmed by a spirit of hopelessness. So today I want to introduce you to a very special little person who is among the most overlooked people in the Bible. This lady was facing hopeless circumstances. Her name is Hagar, the slave girl who served Abraham and Sarah. Hagar is in a very bad situation from the moment that we meet her. Sarah has purchased Hagar probably from Egypt while they were down there as her personal slave. And serving Sarah, understand, was no picnic. Immediately, Hagar was plunged into a no-win kind of situation. God had promised to give Abraham countless descendants, the great and beautiful land of Canaan on which he stood in Genesis 12 and 2. But Sarah felt that God had overlooked one detail. She was barren. She'd had no children. And not only had she had no children, but the fact that she was already in her early 70s at this time. So where were all these descendants supposed to come from? Well, you see, Sarah did something that we're probably famous for as well. She decided to help God out a little bit. She offered Hagar to Abraham, saying, Go sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Genesis 16 and 2. So it wasn't long before Hagar got pregnant with Abraham's child. Now imagine Hagar's viewpoint on this whole business. Here she is, pregnant by Sarah's husband, carrying a child that Sarah wants for her own. And Hagar is still expected to sweep this lady's floors, bake her bread, haul her water, and things just got hot. When Hagar rebelled, Sarah lost it and became abusive to this poor slave girl. That's when Hagar did the first thing that came natural to her and comes natural to us many times. She took flight. As a matter of fact, her name actually means flight. And she fled to the wilderness of Shur, where she lost her way. It's interesting to note that the name Shur means wall. Hagar was up against a wall. How many times have you felt like Hagar? In a wilderness, with your back up against the wall, in a bad situation that's not even your own making. And the angel of the Lord came, bearing God's word to Hagar. He found her pregnant and pitiful. There she sat by a spring in the hot, rugged desert. She was physically spent, miserable, despondent. You'd almost expect the angel to say, "Oh, you poor dear thing. We've been looking down on you from heaven, and boy, have you had it tough. Keep moving on, honey. Run as far as you can away from this mess." But that wasn't what the case was. The angel declared God's word to her. Go back to your mistress and submit to her, in verse 9. Now, if I'd been Hagar, I don't know if I could have done that, but I'd have been very upset, and you would have too. We would have questioned God at this point. God, you don't know what you're doing, do you? But the angel gave her a glimpse of God's higher plan, and it was just to simply obey her, and he was going to bless her. He said, your descendants through this child will so increase that they'll be too numerous to count. He also told her that she was carrying a son and that she would name him Ishmael, which means God hears. Note here that Hagar's response. Remember now, she had no promise that Sarah wouldn't continue the abuse. But what did she say or say? Not only does God hear, he is a God who sees me too, in verse 13. So maybe you're like Hagar. You're in a situation that you don't like. Things are definitely not going your way. And like Hagar, you want to run. Like Hagar, you feel hopeless. Your back is against the wall, and you feel like God has overlooked you in the situation that you are in. Well, I want to assure you today that God hears you, and he also sees you. She was at the point that she had to totally trust God. She had to put everything in his hands. She had faith that God's word to her and her child would not fail. You may be in a bad situation. You may be in a place with your back against the wall today, but I want to assure you God has a word for you today if you will receive it. You see, he's getting ready to birth something great in you. You may be in a bad situation, but hang in there. The birth of something great is on the way. You may be in a bad situation and a bad marriage, but hold on, the birth of something great is about to take place. Your job where you work may be difficult and hard, but hold on, something great is about to come forth. That situation in the church is about to explode, but don't you lose your cool, because God is about to burst something great in your life and in the life of your church. God declared through Jeremiah, for I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11. God's further word to you through Jeremiah is this: call upon me, come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. Seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you and will bring you back from captivity. Jeremiah 29, verses 12 through 14. Just trust God. He's getting ready to birth something. He's got great things that are ahead for you if you'll trust him, obey him, and you just sit back and see what God is going to birth forth in your life.